Hello everyone, my name is Aristotle and I'm here with the Interactive and Immersive HQ. In this tutorial we're going to be covering Pixera's Control, where we're going to see the vast option it gives us in terms of controlling our installation. And we're also going to cover communicating with TouchDesigner via OSC. And at this point, and on behalf of the Interactive and Immersive HQ, I'd like to thank Pixera for sponsoring this series of videos. So let's get started. First of all, what is Pixera Control? Pixera Control is a show control system, a node-based system that allows users to set up user interfaces, access hardware drivers and various functions, as well as add their own drivers and code to set up way more complicated systems than what the basic Pixera setup can offer. In other words, it makes Pixera open-ended. Whatever limitations you have on the basic system pretty much disappear as you can add your own code and drivers as you see fit. Let's walk through the interface a bit. On the left-hand side, we have the library tab, where we can see the drivers for various devices, like projectors, the Grand and Bay console, ArtNet devices, and things like that, which allow you to communicate with those devices, turn them on, off, would be an example, or send information across. As we said earlier, you can add your own drivers as well. Next, we have the protocols, where you see all the things that you would expect from a media server console, like ArtNet, SACN, OSC, MIDI, UDP, all that sort of thing. And finally, we have the tools, which I think of like blocks of code that Pixera developers made to help us. And these are things like logic, if-else statements, and things like that. Generators, like sines, cosines, things like that. Math functions, various random helpers like crossfade, etc., etc. And this gives you an indication of the code you could add yourself to create things like that. In fact, you can see the code behind this as well to help you make your own. Now, on the main panel, we see the workspace, where we actually add our nodes, connect them between them. And on the right-hand side, we see the inspector, which, as is the case all over Pixera, whenever you click on something, you have the inspector on the right-hand side to show you more parameters, properties, or useful information about it. It's interesting to note that on the top part of the workspace, we see the module counter. At this moment, it shows 1, as we only have one node here, the Pixera API. But if I was to add a new module, you will see this going up to 2. And this is here because Pixera's Control, depending on the license you have, has a limitation of how many nodes you can use. We're going to cover licenses in a bit. Now, this Pixera node is perhaps the most important one, most probably the most important one, because it gives you access to the Pixera API. So you can control pretty much everything that is within Pixera through that, like all your timelines, projectors, resources, and things like that. So think of those like folders that contain specific functions. In fact, if I was to click on the timeline, I would get a timeline, timeline 1, and that would bring me all the functions available to control this specific timeline. So you can see this is an extensive list. And it goes on and on for other things. So now that we've seen that, let's see the licensing options for Pixera Control. So there are 3 options. The Pixera Control Gate, which comes with every Pixera version, where you can import custom modules, like blocks of code turned into nodes that other developers or yourself have created, but you cannot create them. Also, Gate is restricted to 10 modules per project, which seems like a very low number, but I can see there's quite a lot you can do with 10 modules already. Then we have the Pixera Control Core, which in my opinion is the sweet spot among the Pixera Control licenses that eliminates the limitation of modules. So you have unlimited modules, and you can actually create, export, and share custom modules with this license. And finally, we have Pixera Control Enterprise, which gives you added functionality, mostly, I would say, for XR setups. So the important difference with this one is that you have support for the camera tracking modules like Stipe, Moses, things like that. So if you need to set up an XR stage or something, this is the license to go with. And now that we've covered the licenses, let's see how we can create something with Pixera Control. First thing I want to do is add some media in the compositing tab, just so we see something playing in the timeline. And I'll add a bunch of cues, a jump cue, a play cue in the middle, just so we can see them later on. And if I hit play, we can see it playing fine. Now back on the control. To create a UI, we need to create it on a specific module. A module would act as a nesting environment for a UI to live in. Now, this doesn't limit the UI in terms of accessing other nodes. It just, it's home, let's say. So in our case, I'll select a new module, go on the UI tab in the inspector, and click on Add UI. Clicking on Add UI creates a web server. And the page we see here is nothing more than a web page, which acts as the front end of that web server. In fact, we can open this in our browser as well, and we can see pretty much the same thing here. The bottom part of the page is the inspector. We can move it to the right side by clicking on this button, or we can detach it and have it as a floating window instead. On the left top part, we have the button bar. So over here, we can add elements, we can store whatever changes we've made. We can filter specific elements or specific nodes to access. We'll see that later on. We can change the page styling. In fact, this is a full HTML5 web page. We can stylize anything, including adding custom CSS if needed. We can access the settings and have scripts running on start, etc. Let's start by adding a button. I'll click this plus icon here and select a button. Clicking on it gives us all its parameters in the inspector. I'll start by changing its name. Say we want this to be a play button. Now, how do we assign this functionality to this button? Over here, you see the action area. Clicking on this shows us this new module, which is an empty one. So we want to access the Pixera API to be able to control the timeline. So to do that, I'll go over here and select Pixera, and we can see this assignment having changed. So if I click on Pixera, it brings me all the folders that we saw earlier. I'll click on Timelines and select Timeline 1. Now we're seeing all the relative functions to Timeline 1. So over here, if I select Play, if I save, now I can, in fact, let me close this window and look at the UI from here so we can see the timeline. This button here brings the timeline conveniently. It shows it within the control interface so we can see if things correspond how we want them to. So now if I click on this button, in fact, I have to go out of editor mode and click on it again. I should be able to see the timeline moving when in fact it doesn't. So let's see what I did wrong here. I can see the action not having been assigned, so I'll do it again. Maybe I need to reload this here. Let me see. Perhaps it wasn't saved correctly. Let's do it again. Go on Pixera. Timelines, timeline 1, and click on play. That's right. And now we can see it working. I can very easily create a pause button by copying and pasting this one. I'll rename it to be pause. And go again in the action tab, hit on timeline and select the pause function. And we can see the timeline getting paused like so. In fact, Pixera has a very nice element within its interface. We can add, instead of adding a play, pause, and stop buttons on our own. And if I click on the plus sign here, now it's working. In fact, you can also hit right click wherever, and give the same, see the same options being brought up. So I just want to add a player element, which gives us all the standard functionality you would expect in terms of controlling the timeline, that is. And we can actually change the properties in terms of what buttons are shown. We can add the next and previous button. And you can see here it says not connected to a timeline. Pixera has no way of knowing which timeline we want to control using this player interface. So over here on the action area, I need to assign this timeline again. Go to timelines and timeline 1. And now it's working as intended. And if I go back, you can see it's working fine. Another interesting thing to add could be a Q browser. Again, same thing. We need to assign a timeline where we see our queues. In fact, I can rename the queue, I can set a note, and if I double click on it, you can see the timeline going back. So all very useful. It's the same logic behind most of the assignments here, really. So I won't cover them all extensively. In fact, we can add a horizontal slider. Say we wanted this to control the opacity or something. We can add a vertical slider. Circular one. All very interesting things. We could add playlist editor. A resource browser would be an interesting one to select specific assets to be played, or in fact, with this one, you can change the live inputs also. There's too many things to be covered here, unfortunately, but I believe you get the gist of what's happening. You can add a clock, if you so wish. You could add a label. And I have to say, this is all very impressive. For someone like me who's not a web developer, being able to control and set up a UI using a web page and scale things and change assignments and everything is quite impressive. Like I'm a huge fan of creating UIs for my installations, and I believe they play a huge part in terms of functionality, not only for ourselves, but whenever we pass on an installation to a client. But also it shows a lot of professionalism, having a nice UI done. And this is the easiest way I've come across to create one, I have to say. So let's delete the things we don't want. And for the next part, I'd like to show you how we can interact with TouchDesigner. through this UI with OSC. Say that we have an imaginary example where we're using Pixera to control all our projectors and screens and whatnot, but we have a few sensors that we want to control through the same interface, but the projectors are being handled from TouchDesigner because perhaps we can do things better there, we are more familiar with it, or for whatever reason. So how do we do that? I'll start by adding a button. Put it here, call it sensor on, and another one, and call it sensor off. Excellent. Now we need to add the OSC node in our interface. I'll just drag it and drop it here. And if I click on it and go on properties, you can see we can change a bunch of things. We can change the port for sending out OSC messages as well as the one for receiving. And we'll see a bunch of other interesting stuff later on. So I'll go back to my UI. And over here on the action section, I want to go to change again the node I'm addressing. So I'll go here, go to OSC, go to send, and say we want to send a string in this case. Let's try again. Yes, here we define the path. And here we define the message. So I'll just say sensor on. And we'll do similarly for this one. Sensor off. And whenever those messages are sent to TouchDesigner, TouchDesigner can do with them as we program it to do. So let's see how those work on TouchDesigner. Let me bring up TouchDesigner. Let me split my screen. Okay, so in here, I'd like to have an OSC in that. I'll make sure to change the port to 9000. And let's try using those buttons. And just like that, we can see the messages coming across. On the callbacks, you can add your own code to trigger other things whenever a specific message is received. Now, how do we do the opposite though? Say we want to, for whatever reason, to trigger things within our timeline in Pixera from TouchDesigner. Say we have this sensor tracking people, and whenever they go within a hot zone, we want something to either say play, pause, or stop. And for that, we'll add an OSC out that. And we want to send a specific message, so I'll add a text that. In this case, you could have this set up with buttons or otherwise. So say this is text play, and we'll need to address this OSC out operator. Sorry. Define the path. Well, let's call this TD play. and the actual message. Let's make sure that the port matches the one we have set up in Pixera. So if I go here on the properties, I should be able to see the receiving port. Yes. So I need to change that to 8990. And if I click on run here, we can see the last received path and last received value coming across in the OSC node. Now, an interesting thing we can do is create an action based on the last received path and last received value. So if I just click this button here and go in the receive folder, we actually see that Pixera gives us a new function here. So whenever the subject of TD play is received, we can choose to do other things with this. So in fact, let's do something similar for pause. And stop. And I'll just change here the path. I'll call it the pause. Obviously, this is a super basic system. You could make way more complicated structures for your OSC messages. So if I run this one, again, immediately I see the TD pause path being received here, and I can create another action based on that. And likewise for the stop message. So it's being received, I'll create another action. Now that we're happy that all of these are working, I can go back to Pixera. And I can grab the Pixera node, bring it here, and find the specific functions that we need within our timeline. So we have the play, pause, and stop, and just connect them like so. Oops, no, I need to disconnect this one. Play and stop. So let's test it out. Bring this back again here. And let's see. I'll run this and instantly we can see the timeline playing. Pause it and I'll stop it. Perfect. So everything works as intended. I hope that this is enough to show you the flexibility that Pixera Controls gives us. There's obviously too many things to cover in a short tutorial, but in my experience, this is a pretty simple setup to go through and gives you immense flexibility. So for someone who's not a developer, it's an interesting choice to have in your arsenal. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Aristotle, and I'll see you on the next one.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.